I walked in and saw my family on the couch, my husband, mom, son, and my own sister. "What's wrong?" I asked, fearing the worst. "Mom, sit down," my son said. "You need to accept a new reality. You're not in charge of this family anymore. Aunt Brenda. She makes Dad happier now." I was furious, they all knew. I left the room without a word. The next day, I had 118 missed calls when they realized the revenge I had prepared. "Hello there. Thank you for being here with me today. Please, make yourself comfortable. I'm going to tell you a story. It's my story. And it's not an easy one to tell, so I appreciate you lending me your time and your ear. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. You know, for the longest time, I thought I had it all. I really did. A life that wasn't flashy, not like the ones you see in the movies, but it was solid. It was real. It was the kind of life you build piece by piece, day by day, until you look around and think, this is it. This is good. I had a husband, Russell, who I'd been with for 30 years. 30 years. We met in college, two kids with more dreams than sense, and we built a life together from scratch. From a tiny, drafty apartment with mismatched furniture to a comfortable home in the suburbs with a son, Leo, who was the absolute, undisputed light of my world. I was that wife, that mom. The one who remembered every birthday, every parent-teacher conference, every doctor's appointment. I was the keeper of our family's rhythm. I knew that Russell liked his coffee with exactly 1.5 sugars, that he couldn't sleep without his favorite worn-out pillow. I was the one who made sure his favorite shirts were always clean and ironed for his business trips, the one who could whip up Leo's favorite mac and cheese from memory, the kind with the baked breadcrumbs on top, just the way he liked it. My life was a tapestry woven from these small, everyday acts of love. And I cherished it. It was my purpose. I truly believed that this foundation of trust and shared history was unbreakable. That love, our love, was enough to protect me, to protect my dignity. I was wrong. My name is Lorraine, and this is the story of how my entire world was built on a lie. It's a story of betrayal, a betrayal so deep and so personal that it forced me to become someone I never imagined I could be. It all started so quietly, as these things often do. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. A little whisper of wrongness in a life that had always felt so right. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early spring. I remember the sun was streaming through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The faint smell of freshly cut grass drifted in from the neighbor's yard. It was a perfectly ordinary day. I was sitting at our old oak table, the one we bought at a flea market when we were first married, its surface scarred with the history of 30 years of homework and family dinners. I was doing the monthly bills. Just a normal, boring chore. I had a system. I'd sort them into piles, utilities, mortgage, credit cards, and pay them one by one. As I opened the statement for our shared credit card, my eyes scanned the list of charges. The grocery store, the gas station, Leo's new soccer cleats, and then a line item that made me pause. $250. The Grand Regency Hotel. I frowned, tapping the paper. The Grand Regency was a fancy hotel downtown, the kind people used for romantic getaways or big corporate conferences. We hadn't been there. I would have remembered a $250 night at the Grand Regency. I thought back over the last month, picturing the calendar in my head. There was nothing. No anniversaries, no special occasions. Just the steady, predictable rhythm of our lives. When Russell came home that evening, the smell of garlic bread already filling the house, I decided to bring it up. I didn't want to be accusatory. I just wanted an explanation. I waited until after dinner, after we'd cleared the plates and Leo had gone up to his room to do his homework. We were sitting in the living room, the TV murmuring in the background. "Hey, honey," I said, folding the laundry on the couch. A funny thing on the credit card bill this month. He looked up from his newspaper, peering at me over his reading glasses. Oh yeah? What's that? There's a charge from the Grand Regency downtown. From a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember what that was for? I watched his face carefully. There was no flicker of panic, no hesitation. He just blinked, then a look of recognition dawned. Oh, that. Right. The company booked a block of rooms for that marketing summit. A bunch of the executives from out of town flew in. I had to go down there for a dinner meeting one night. He folded his paper and set it aside. Don't worry about it, the reimbursement check is already on its way. I probably just forgot to submit the expense report right away. It sounded so plausible. So simple. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation. And I wanted to believe him. I was a wife who trusted her husband. That was the cornerstone of our entire marriage. So, I nodded. Oh, okay. That makes sense. I tucked the bill back into its envelope and put it in the paid pile. But as I went to sleep that night, lying next to him in our bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was just a little thing, a tiny detail. But it was a thread, and if I pulled on it, I was terrified that my whole world might unravel. So I didn't. I told myself I was being silly, that 30 years of marriage had earned him the benefit of the doubt. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath my feet had just shifted, ever so slightly. That little seed of doubt started to grow over the next few months, watered by small, strange moments that just didn't add up. My sister, Brenda, started coming over more often. Which, on the surface, should have been a wonderful thing. We were sisters, only 2 years apart, and had always been close. Or so I thought. But her visits started to feel different. She'd always show up on weekdays, usually on a Wednesday, when she knew Leo was at school and I was at my part-time job at the local library. I'd come home early one day, my shift ending unexpectedly, to find her car in the driveway. When I walked in, I found her and Russell in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, laughing intimately over a half-empty bottle of wine. The air was thick with a kind of comfortable familiarity that felt exclusive, like an inside joke I wasn't a part of. They both jumped a little when I walked in, their smiles freezing for a split second before becoming overly bright, overly welcoming. "Lorraine!" Brenda chirped, rushing over to hug me. "I just popped by to see if you had any extra flour for the bake sale." Russell and I got to talking. "Yeah," Russell added, swirling the wine in his glass. "Brenda was just telling me the funniest story about her neighbor. You just missed it." I forced a smile, the hug feeling stiff and strange. "Oh, well, the flour's in the pantry, you know that." But the excuse felt thin, flimsy. And the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching, it was a look that passed between them that was more than just brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Then there were the phone calls. Russell had always been a bit attached to his phone, but now it was like an extension of his hand. He'd be on it constantly, smiling and texting, but the moment I walked into the room, he'd quickly lock the screen and put it face down on the table. "Just a work thing," he'd mutter if I asked. Once, his phone buzzed late at night after we'd gone to bed. He snatched it off the nightstand so fast, I barely saw the screen light up. He got out of bed and went into the bathroom to take the call, closing the door softly behind him. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my stomach in knots. Our own mother, Beverly, seemed to be in on it too, in her own subtle, manipulative way. During our weekly Sunday dinners, which were a mandatory tradition, she'd make these little comments that felt like tiny, targeted digs. "Lorraine, you should let Russell have some fun," she'd say if I mentioned he'd been out late with clients twice that week. "A man with his kind of pressure at work needs an outlet. Don't be one of those controlling wives." Another time, when I mentioned Brenda seemed to be spending a lot of money lately on new clothes, my mother just smiled thinly and said, "Well, it's nice to see her enjoying life." A woman should take care of herself. The underlying message was always there: Russell and Brenda could do no wrong, and if I had a problem with it, the problem was me. I felt like I was going crazy. I tried to bring it up with Russell once, gently. We were in the car, driving home from a movie. "It seems like you and Brenda are spending a lot of time together lately," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He shot me a look of pure indignation. "She's your sister, Lorraine. Are you saying I can't be friends with my own sister-in-law? My God, you're getting paranoid in your old age." The conversation was shut down. I was the paranoid one. The insecure one. The controlling one. They were so united, a solid wall of denial that made me question my own sanity. I started to pull back, to watch from the sidelines, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I was still making the mac and cheese and ironing the shirts, but the joy was gone. It was just motion, a hollow routine I performed while a storm gathered inside me. The worst part was the loneliness. To be surrounded by your family, your husband, your sister, your own mother, and feel utterly, completely alone, it's a cold, hollowing feeling. I was clinging to the hope that I was wrong, that this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. But deep down, I think I already knew. I just wasn't ready to face it. The moment the illusion shattered wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scene from a movie. There was no screaming match, no door slamming. It happened on a quiet Thursday night. The house was peaceful. Russell was watching a game in the den, and I was in the kitchen, trying to find a recipe for a lemon meringue pie I wanted to make for the weekend. My old cookbook was falling apart, so I decided to look it up online. Leo was in the living room, doing his history project on my tablet. Our old desktop computer had finally given up the ghost a few weeks prior. "Hey sweetie," I called out. "Can I borrow my tablet for a few minutes? I need to look something up." "Sure, Mom," he said. A few minutes later, he came into the kitchen and handed it to me, before heading upstairs. As I took it, I saw that an instant messaging app was open on the screen, something I rarely used. And at the top of the conversation list was a group chat with a name I'd never seen before, The Confidants. My heart gave a strange little flutter. Curiosity got the better of me. Who were these confidants? I tapped on the group name, and the participants were listed right there: Russell, Brenda, and Beverly. My husband, my sister, and my mother. My blood ran cold. My hands started to tremble. This had to be a mistake. Maybe it was for planning a surprise party for me? My birthday was a few months away. It was a desperate, flimsy hope, and I knew it. With a deep, shuddering breath, I started to scroll up. The conversation stretched back for months. And as I read, the world I knew, the life I had built, the very foundation of my identity, crumbled into dust around me. It was all there. In black and white. Vile, irrefutable proof. "Brenda, he's taking me to that steakhouse Friday. Just tell her you're working late." My breath hitched. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a sob. That was our anniversary steakhouse. The place Russell had proposed to me 31 years ago. A place I thought was sacred to us. Russell, done. She won't suspect a thing. She's too busy planning Leo's birthday party to notice anything. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had spent weeks planning that party, staying up late to hand-make decorations, wanting every detail to be perfect for my son, while he was using my love for our child as a cover for his sordid little trysts. I felt dizzy. I had to sit down at the kitchen table, the screen of the tablet glowing with betrayal. I kept scrolling, my eyes burning, forcing myself to absorb every poisonous word. They joked about a sweater I had bought him for Christmas. They mocked my taste in movies. They laughed about a time I'd gotten a flat tire and had to call him for help, a memory I had thought was a sweet example of him being my hero. To them, it was a joke about my incompetence. And then, the message that broke me. the one that turned the knife. It was from my own mother. Beverly, just be careful, you too. We can't have her finding out before we secure the inheritance from your father's estate. Once that's settled and we have control of the trust, she'll have no choice but to accept the new reality. Inheritance. My father, who had passed away 2 years prior, had been a careful, successful man. He had left me a significant sum, along with the paid-off house we were living in, which had been in our family for generations. They weren't just betraying me emotionally. They were actively plotting to steal my financial security, my legacy from my dad. This wasn't a passionate mistake. This was a cold, calculated conspiracy. In that moment, sitting in the dim light of my once happy kitchen, the old Lorraine, the trusting, loving, forgiving Lorraine, died. She evaporated, leaving behind something cold, hard, and sharp. The grief was immense, a physical weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe, but underneath it, a different feeling was beginning to smolder. It was rage. A pure, clean rage that burned away the confusion and the self-doubt. They thought I was a pushover. They were about to find out what happens when you push someone too far. The days that followed were a blur of calculated numbness. I moved through my life like a ghost, an actress playing the part of myself. I performed my duties with a chilling precision. I made breakfast, the clinking of the silverware sounding unnaturally loud in the silent kitchen. I packed Leo's lunch, a little note tucked inside just like always, my handwriting the only thing that didn't feel like a lie. I kissed Russell goodbye in the morning, the touch of my lips on his cheek feeling like ash, a phantom gesture from a life that was no longer real. But inside, I was a different person. My mind, which used to be filled with grocery lists and PTA meeting reminders, was now a whirlwind of planning, of piecing together the true extent of their deception. The rage was a constant, low hum beneath the surface, a furnace that kept me going. The final, brutal confirmation came from the one person who never meant to hurt me, my son. The final nail in the coffin of the family I thought I knew. It was a Saturday morning, a few days after I'd discovered the group chat. The weather was beautiful, one of those perfect autumn days. We were in the backyard, planting some new tulip bulbs for the spring. It was a ritual we had, a small tradition. Leo was digging in the dirt, his face smudged and serious as he carefully placed a bulb in the hole he'd made. Out of nowhere, he looked up at me with his big, innocent eyes, the same color as mine, and said, "Mom, why does Dad play the secret wrestling game with Aunt Brenda?" I froze, the small trowel falling from my hand and landing with a soft thud on the grass. My voice, when I found it, was a strained whisper. What game is that, sweetie?" "You know," he said, matter-of-factly, as if discussing a cartoon. "The one they play in your bedroom when you're at work. They close the door and tell me to be quiet 'cause it's a grown-up game. Aunt Brenda says it's our little secret." My heart felt like it had been ripped from my chest and stomped into the dirt. They hadn't just done this behind my back. They had done it in my home, in my bed, with my child just rooms away. They had poisoned the sanctity of my home and tried to poison the innocence of my son, turning him into an unknowing accomplice in their sordid affair. Then he added the final, devastating detail. Aunt Brenda bought me that new Super Laser 5000 console, you know. She said it was a present for being so good at keeping secrets. The audacity of it, the sheer, calculated cruelty, was breathtaking. She had used a toy to bribe my son into silence, to make him a co-conspirator. That was it. That was the point of no return. The grief and the shock hardened into a diamond-hard resolve. I needed more than their messages. I needed proof that no one, not a judge, not a lawyer, not another family member, could ever deny. I needed to see it with my own eyes. That afternoon, while Russell was out playing golf and Brenda was supposedly at a yoga class, I drove to an electronics store on the other side of town. I walked through the aisles of sleek gadgets and giant televisions, my hands shaking slightly, feeling like a spy in a cheap movie. I eventually found what I was looking for in a section labeled Home Security, a tiny, motion-activated camera, cleverly disguised as a USB charger. It was small enough to be completely unnoticeable when plugged into the wall outlet next to my bedside table. An outlet that had a direct, clear view of my bed. My marriage bed. Buying it felt clandestine and dirty. I paid in cash, my heart pounding as the young clerk rang me up, half expecting him to ask what I needed it for. He didn't, of course. He was just a kid doing his job. Setting it up was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. My hands felt clumsy, my heart hammered against my ribs. Every part of me screamed that this was wrong, that I shouldn't have to spy in my own home. This was the kind of thing that happened to other people on daytime TV shows. But the woman I was becoming knew it was necessary. This wasn't about saving my marriage anymore. It was about survival. It was about gathering the weapons I would need for the war that was coming. I didn't have to wait long. The very next day was a Wednesday, Brenda's usual day to pop by. I told Russell I was taking on an extra shift at the library, a lie that slipped off my tongue with terrifying ease. I needed an alibi, a reason to be gone for hours. Instead of going to the library, I drove to a nondescript coffee shop miles away from home, in a town where no one would know me. I chose a small table in the back corner, ordered a coffee I never intended to drink, and opened my laptop. My hands were slick with sweat as I connected my phone to the camera's live feed. And then, I waited. For 2 hours, I sat there, pretending to read, my stomach churning. Then, at 2:15 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion detection alert. My breath caught in my throat. And I watched. I watched as my sister, Brenda, let herself into my house with a key I never knew she had. I watched as my husband greeted her in the foyer, not with a friendly hug, but with a deep, passionate kiss that seemed to go on forever. I watched as they made their way, laughing, his arm around her waist, into my bedroom. My bedroom. I should have turned it off. I should have thrown my laptop against the wall. But I couldn't. I sat there, in a public coffee shop with cheerful music playing in the background, and forced myself to witness the complete and utter desecration of my life. I watched them on my bed, the bed where I had slept for 30 years, the bed where my son had been conceived, the bed where I had cried myself to sleep for the past few weeks. And then I saw it. The final, intimate betrayal. The detail that would burn itself into my memory forever. Around Brenda's neck was a delicate gold locket. My grandmother's locket. My grandmother had given it to me on my 16th birthday, her hands trembling as she fastened it around my neck. It had gone missing years ago, and I had been heartbroken, searching the house for weeks, assuming I'd lost it forever. I watched, frozen, as Russell took the locket in his fingers. He opened it, revealing the tiny, faded photos of my parents on their wedding day inside. And he kissed it gently, right before he kissed my sister. He had stolen a piece of my history, a piece of my soul, and given it to her as a trophy. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A strange, chilling calm settled over me. It was the calm of absolute certainty. There were no more doubts, no more questions. There was only the cold, hard truth. I reached out a steady hand and clicked record. I let the camera run for another 10 minutes, capturing more than enough undeniable evidence. Then I saved the video file to a secure cloud drive and to a separate USB stick. I packed up my laptop. I walked out of that coffee shop, leaving a full, cold cup of coffee on the table. The woman who had walked in there a few hours earlier was gone forever. In her place was a woman with a mission. They had treated me like a fool. They had laughed at my expense. Now, they were going to see what their fool was truly capable of. The game was on. And I was going to win. The next morning, I called in sick to the library. I told them I had a terrible migraine, which wasn't entirely a lie. The pressure behind my eyes was immense. But instead of staying in bed, I got dressed in the nicest suit I owned, a charcoal gray outfit I usually saved for weddings or funerals. It felt appropriate. This was, after all, the funeral of my marriage. I drove to the city. My destination was a tall, glass building with the names of a prestigious law firm etched in gold on the door. I had spent the entire night researching, fueled by coffee and rage, looking for the best, most ruthless divorce attorney I could find. Her name was Ms. Evelyn Davies, and her reputation preceded her. Online reviews called her the Shark. They said she was brilliant, relentless, and took no prisoners. She was exactly what I needed. I sat in the plush, silent waiting room of her office, feeling small and out of place among the expensive leather chairs and modern art. But when she walked out to greet me, a tall, imposing woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit, I felt a flicker of strength. She didn't offer fake sympathy. She just shook my hand firmly and led me into her office. Her office overlooked the entire city, a view of power and control. I sat across from her at a polished mahogany desk, the city skyline behind her. "So, Mrs. Albright," she said, her voice crisp and clear. "Your call was urgent. Tell me what's going on." I didn't cry. I didn't get hysterical. The time for tears was over. I calmly opened my purse, took out a small, unlabeled USB drive, and slid it across her desk. "Before I say anything," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I need you to watch this." She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, but she took the drive and plugged it into her computer. I didn't watch the screen. I watched her face. Her professional demeanor didn't crack, but I saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. I saw her eyes narrow into slits. When the 10-minute video was over, she closed the laptop with a soft click and turned her full attention to me. "I see," she said, her voice now laced with a cold fury that mirrored my own. "Please, continue." And so I did. I laid out everything. I gave her the printouts of the group chat, hundreds of pages of their vile correspondence. I gave her the bank statements I had secretly copied, highlighting the unexplained withdrawals and the transfers to a secret account in Russell's name. I told her about my father's inheritance, the house that was legally mine, and the suspicious second mortgage that had been taken out against it 6 months ago, a document I had found in Russell's desk that bore a clumsy, forged version of my signature. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers, looking at me for a long moment. The silence stretched on. "Lorraine," she finally said, her voice dropping, becoming more serious. "I want to be very clear. This is not just an infidelity case. This is a coordinated, systematic campaign of financial and emotional abuse. What your husband, your sister, and your mother have done, it's not just wrong, it's criminal. We have them on bank fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and forgery. This goes far beyond a simple divorce." Hearing my deepest fears validated by this powerful, intelligent woman felt like a dam breaking inside me. The weight I had been carrying alone suddenly felt a little lighter. "I don't just want a divorce," I told her, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. "I want to take back everything they have stolen from me. My money, my house, my life. I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone ever again." Ms. Davies smiled, a thin, sharp smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the smile of a shark that had just scented blood in the water. "Oh, we'll do more than that," she said. "We're going to dismantle their entire world. We will pursue this both in civil court for the divorce and the return of your assets, and I will be handing over a copy of this file to the district attorney's office. They will face criminal charges." We spent the next 2 hours mapping out a strategy. It was a two-pronged attack. The first prong was the silent, legal one. Ms. Davies and her team would begin the process of freezing assets and preparing a mountain of legal paperwork that would drop on them like an avalanche. The second prong was my own. I told her I couldn't just let this play out in courtrooms. I needed to confront them. I needed to see the looks on their faces when their perfect, secret world came crashing down. And I knew the perfect place to do it. Our family had a tradition, a big Sunday dinner at my mother's house every month. It was their stage, the place where Beverly played the benevolent matriarch and they all reinforced their web of lies. It was supposed to be next week. It would be their last supper. I would be the one serving up justice. And it would be a dish best served cold. Ms. Davies, after a moment of consideration, agreed. A public confrontation with witnesses would make their denials in court all the more difficult. For the next week, I became the greatest actress of my lifetime. I went home and I played the part of the happy, oblivious wife. It was the most excruciatingly difficult performance of my life. I smiled when Russell walked in the door. I made his favorite dinner, pot roast. I asked him about his day and listened to his lies with a serene, interested expression on my face. Inside, I was a coiled spring of rage and anticipation, but on the surface, I was a placid lake. Sharing a bed with him was the worst part. Lying there in the dark, feeling the warmth of his body next to mine, a body that had been with my sister just days before. I would wait until his breathing evened out into a deep sleep, and then I would slip out of bed and go downstairs. I'd sit in the dark kitchen with my laptop, going over the evidence again and again, feeding my rage, strengthening my resolve. I was like a general planning a battle, memorizing every detail of the enemy's weakness. Brenda called me twice that week, her voice dripping with the fake, cloying concern that I now saw for what it was. "Hey, sis. Just checking in. You've seemed a little quiet lately. Everything okay?" "Just tired from work," I'd reply, my voice smooth as silk. "Looking forward to Sunday dinner, though. It'll be nice for us all to be together." "Me too," she chirped, oblivious. "I'm making my famous apple crumble for dessert." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The plan for the dinner was simple but devastating. Ms. Davies had helped me prepare 4 packages. Each one was a thick manila envelope, and inside each was a curated collection of their crimes, tailored to the recipient. For Russell, there were screenshots of his most damning messages with Brenda, glossy 8x10 stills from the bedroom video, and bank statements showing money moved from our joint account to his secret one. For Brenda, there were her own incriminating messages, proof of her lavish spending, and a copy of the deed to my house showing the fraudulent loan taken out against it. And for my mother, Beverly, there were her messages orchestrating the entire affair, especially the parts about my inheritance and the college fund my father had set up for Leo, which they had been systematically draining. The 4th envelope was for Brenda's husband, Dale. It was the thinnest, but the most brutal. It contained only what he needed to know, proof of the affair and the theft from their son's education savings. The day of the dinner, I made sure Leo had a sleepover arranged at his best friend's house. I dropped him off that afternoon with a hug that lasted a little longer than usual. "I love you more than anything in the world, you know that, right?" I whispered into his hair. He just grinned, told me I was being weird, and ran off to play with his friend. I would not have my son witness the carnage that was about to unfold. As I got ready that evening, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was different. The softness around her eyes was gone, replaced by a steely glint. The perpetual worry line between my brows had smoothed out, replaced by a look of grim determination. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple, elegant dark blue dress. I wanted to look composed, in control. I was not a victim about to be thrown to the wolves. I was the hunter, and the trap was set. Tonight, the charade would end. Tonight, they would finally see the woman they had created. The drive to my mother's house felt surreal. The familiar streets of my childhood town looked different, colored by the new, harsh reality I was living in. Beverly's house was the epicenter of my family's life, a large, pristine colonial home with white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn. It always screamed wealth and good taste on the outside, but I now knew it was rotting from the inside out, a beautiful facade hiding a core of decay. When I walked in, the scene was disgustingly perfect. The smell of roast beef and rosemary filled the air. My mother, Beverly, greeted me at the door with a kiss on the cheek that felt like the touch of a snake. "Lorraine, darling. I'm so glad you could make it. You look lovely." Russell was already there, holding a glass of whiskey, laughing with Brenda's husband, Dale, a good, simple man who worked as a contractor and who had no idea he was living a lie, too. Brenda came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a frilly apron, playing the part of the dutiful daughter. "Lorraine! You look great," she chirped, her voice a little too high. She hugged me, a quick, brittle embrace, and I had to use every ounce of self-control not to recoil. I could feel the cold metal of my grandmother's locket through her thin sweater, resting against her skin. My locket! The rage inside me flared hot, but I pushed it down. Not yet. We all gathered in the dining room, around the huge mahogany table that had hosted 100 family celebrations, 100 Christmases, 100 lies. Dale was seated next to Brenda, and he reached for her hand, giving it a loving squeeze. My mother sat at the head of the table, beaming like a queen presiding over her court. Russell sat beside me, and at one point, he had the audacity to put his hand on my knee under the table and squeeze it affectionately. I wanted to be sick. I moved my leg away, and he gave me a slightly puzzled look. The conversation was light, meaningless, a symphony of hypocrisy. They talked about work, about the weather, about a new show on TV. All the while, I could feel the weight of the manila envelopes in my large handbag by my feet. My heart was pounding a steady, heavy drumbeat against my ribs, but my hands were perfectly still. I ate my roast beef. I complimented my mother on the gravy. I smiled at their jokes. I played my part one last time. Then, just as my mother was about to bring out Brenda's famous apple crumble for dessert, I cleared my throat. "Actually, before we have dessert," I said, my voice cutting through the cheerful chatter like a shard of glass. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me, their forks halfway to their mouths. "I have something I'd like to share," I continued, my voice dangerously calm. "A little, family project I've been working on." I leaned down, my movements deliberate, and retrieved the envelopes from my bag. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the hardwood floor seemed to echo in the room. I walked around the table, a grim reaper delivering judgment. I placed one envelope in front of Russell, one in front of Brenda, and one in front of my mother. Beverly looked at the thick, brown envelope, her eyes narrowing. "Lorraine, what is this? Some kind of joke?" "Go ahead," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a frozen lake. "Open them." The sound of paper tearing was deafening in the silent room. I stood at the end of the table and I watched their faces, one by one. I saw Russell's confident smirk falter as he pulled out the first page, a screenshot of him and Brenda kissing in my foyer. I saw his face drain of all color, turning a pasty, sickly white as he flipped through the glossy 8x10 stills from the bedroom camera. I saw Brenda's hand fly to her mouth, a choked gasp escaping her lips as she read her own treacherous words, her texts planning secret meetings, mocking me. I saw her eyes dart around the room like a trapped animal. And I saw my mother's regal composure shatter. Her face turned a mottled, ugly shade of red as she stared at the evidence of her conspiracy, the printouts detailing her plan to secure my inheritance. Dale, utterly confused, looked from his wife's horrified face to me. "Lorraine, for God's sake, what's going on?" I had an envelope for him, too. I walked over and handed it to him, my eyes soft with a pity I only felt for him. "I think you deserve to know, Dale. You're part of this family, too." He opened it. His face, as he read, went through a rapid, terrible transformation. Confusion turned to disbelief, disbelief to dawning horror, and finally, to a look of such profound, gut-wrenching pain that I almost looked away. He looked at the bank statements, at the proof that the college fund he worked so hard to build for their son was nearly empty. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of utter ruin. Then, all hell broke loose. "What the hell is this?" Russell finally hissed, his voice a strangled whisper. He shoved the photos away from him as if they were contaminated. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury. "Lorraine, why would you do this? This is private." "Do this?" I repeated, and a laugh, a harsh, bitter sound I didn't recognize as my own, escaped my lips. You mean expose your lies? You're cheating? The fact that you've been sleeping with my sister in my own bed? Was that private too? Or was it just my dignity that you didn't mind making public? Brenda started to sob, thick, theatrical tears that held no currency with me anymore. It's not what it looks like. You're twisting everything. We were just comforting each other. You've been so distant lately. Distant? I shot back, my voice rising. I've been distant? Or was I just busy running our home, raising our son, and managing the life that you were so busy blowing up behind my back? And am I twisting these bank records, Brenda? I pointed a trembling finger at the papers. Am I twisting the fraudulent loan you and Mom took out on my house? The house my father left to me? That's when Dale finally spoke. He held up a single piece of paper, his hand shaking violently. He looked at Brenda, his voice cracking with a pain that was awful to witness. The college fund, Brenda? You took the money we saved for Michael's future? For his education? Brenda just stared at him, her face a mask of guilt, unable to speak. You told me the market was down, he whispered, the realization dawning on him. You lied to me for months. My mother, Beverly, finally found her voice. She slammed her hand on the table, the silverware rattling. How dare you, she shrieked, her face contorted with rage, pointing a jeweled finger at me. You come into my house, on a Sunday, and you try to tear this family apart. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I said, stepping toward her, my voice low and dangerous. You mean everything you've done to me? You plotted with them. You encouraged this. You, my own mother, helped them plan how to steal my inheritance. You ungrateful little witch, she spat, her mask of sophistication gone, revealing the ugly face beneath. Russell deserved to be happy. Brenda deserved to be happy. You were always so dull. So predictable. Always playing the martyr. You should have been grateful he stayed with you as long as he did. Her words were meant to cut me, and they did. But they also did something else. They severed the very last thread of any lingering love or obligation I felt for her. She wasn't my mother. She was a monster wrapped in a cashmere sweater. I was a good wife. I was a good daughter. I was a good sister, I said, my voice trembling with a fury I had held in for weeks. And you took my love and my trust and you used it as a weapon against me. You laughed at me in your secret little chat group. You called me a pushover. I leaned in close, my eyes locked on hers. Well, the pushover is done being pushed. It was at that moment, in the middle of the shouting and the crying, that Brenda snapped. Maybe it was the guilt, or the terror of being exposed, or the sight of her own husband looking at her with pure, unadulterated contempt. She let out a guttural scream, a sound of pure animal rage, and she lunged across the table at me. Her nails clawed at my face, and I stumbled back, a sharp sting erupting on my cheek. She came at me again, grabbing a handful of my hair, shrieking, "You ruined my life. You ruined everything." A primal instinct I never knew I possessed took over. I wasn't the quiet librarian anymore. I was a cornered animal fighting for its life. I pushed her back, hard, breaking her grip. She tripped over a dining chair and went sprawling onto the floor with a crash. The room descended into utter chaos. Russell and Dale rushed forward to pull us apart, both shouting. My mother was screaming hysterically about calling the police. Dale managed to grab a thrashing, hysterical Brenda and haul her to her feet, while Russell stood between us, his hands up as if to ward me off. "Lorraine, stop. This is insane. Look at what you're doing." I stood there, breathing heavily, my hair a mess, a stinging scratch on my cheek. I looked at the wreckage around me, my weeping sister, my terrified husband, my apoplectic mother, and Dale, whose entire world had just been detonated. The beautiful dining room was a war zone. The roast was getting cold. The apple crumble would never be served. And I had started the war. I want to stop here for just a second. If you're still listening, if you've followed me this far into the darkest night of my life, I need to ask you for a small favor. Please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below. That way, I'll know you gave me a like, and I'll know you're right here with me on this journey. Hearing what came next, it's not easy. But your support means the world to me and gives me the strength to keep going. Please, comment with a number 1, and then listen to the rest of my story. In the ringing silence that followed the fight, the only sound was Brenda's ragged sobbing. My mother was the first to recover. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking with rage. "That's it. I'm calling the police. I'm having you arrested for assault. I saw you push her." I just looked at her. I felt nothing. No fear, no panic. Just a cold, clear certainty. I was 10 steps ahead of them. "Go ahead, Mom," I said, my voice calm. "Call them. I'm sure they'll be very interested in this envelope right here." I picked up her packet of evidence from the table and waved it gently. "It's got everything. The conspiracy to commit fraud, the forged signatures on the loan documents. Wire fraud is a federal offense, you know." I had a very interesting chat with my lawyer, Ms. Davies. She was very clear on the potential legal ramifications. "I'm sure the DA will have a field day with your family-only group chat. I might get a slap on the wrist for tonight, for defending myself. But you? You 3 are looking at prison time." I watched the color drain from her face. Her hand, holding the phone, slowly lowered to her side. The word lawyer had hit its mark. She knew I had her. They were all trapped in the web they had so carefully woven for me. I stood up straight and pulled my dress back into place. I felt a strange sense of power, of clarity. For the first time in my life, I was the one in control. I looked at each of them, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Here's what's going to happen," I began, addressing the room like a CEO at a hostile takeover. "Russell, my lawyer will be serving you with divorce papers tomorrow morning at your office. Don't bother coming back to the house. I've already had the locks changed this afternoon while you were here." His mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You can't do that. Half of that is mine." "Actually, it's not," I said coldly. "The house was part of my inheritance. And as for our other assets, Ms. Davies has already filed an emergency motion to have them frozen, pending the investigation into the significant funds you've been embezzling from our joint accounts. You'll be lucky if you walk away with your golf clubs." I turned to my sister, who was now being held up by Dale, looking at me with pure hatred in her red-rimmed eyes. "Brenda, I suggest you get a very good lawyer. Because not only am I suing you civilly for your part in the fraudulent loan, but Dale here seems to have his own case against you for emptying your son's college fund." Dale just nodded numbly, holding his wife at arm's length as if she were poison. "And that locket around your neck," I added, my voice dripping with ice. "It was a gift from my grandmother. I'll be expecting it back." Finally, I turned to my mother. She looked shrunken, defeated. "And you," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You will never see your grandson again. You will not call him. You will not send him gifts. He will not be a part of your toxic world. You are dead to him, and you are dead to me. You made your choice." I didn't wait for a response. I picked up my handbag, turned my back on the ruins of my family, and walked out of that house without a single look back. I got in my car, and as I drove away into the cool night air, I didn't cry. I felt free. The war had just begun, but I had already won the most important battle. I had won myself back. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Ms. Davies was, in a word, magnificent. She was a general, and I was her soldier. We had daily calls. We met in her office to go over strategy. She filed injunctions, restraining orders, and motions with dizzying speed. My mother, Russell, and Brenda hired a lawyer who tried to paint me as an unstable, vengeful woman, but the mountain of evidence I had was irrefutable. The video, the texts, the bank records, the forged signature confirmed by a handwriting expert, they told a story that no lawyer could spin. Dale, true to his word, filed for divorce from Brenda. He ended up being my strongest ally. He provided his own financial records which uncovered even more of Brenda's deceptions. It turned out she had been stealing from him for years, funding a lavish lifestyle of secret shopping sprees and spa days with Russell, all while telling Dale they were on a tight budget. He moved out of their house and fought for, and won, sole custody of their son. I felt a deep sadness for him. He was another innocent casualty in their selfish war. We spoke on the phone a few times, two survivors of the same shipwreck, offering each other quiet support. The financial fallout for them was catastrophic. The court froze their assets pending the fraud investigation. Beverly's reputation in her high society circle was destroyed when word got out. Russell was fired from his high-paying executive job when his company's board learned he was under investigation for fraud. Turns out they have a strict ethics clause and didn't appreciate the bad press. He had been on track for a huge promotion, but now he was unemployable. They lost everything because they were greedy. They wanted what was mine, and in trying to take it, they lost everything that was theirs. The custody battle for Leo was the hardest part. That was the only front where I felt true fear. Russell and my mother tried to use the fight at the dinner against me, claiming I was a violent and unfit mother. Their lawyer brought it up in a deposition, a long, grueling meeting in a sterile conference room. Mrs. Albright, their lawyer sneered, "Is it true that you physically assaulted your sister?" Before I could answer, Ms. Davies slid a document across the table. "It's true my client defended herself after being physically attacked. But perhaps you'd be more interested in these. They're text messages between your clients, dated the week before the dinner, in which they explicitly discuss a plan to provoke my client into an outburst they could then use against her in a divorce proceeding." The opposing lawyer's face went pale as he read. The judge, when we presented it in a closed hearing, was appalled. I was granted sole custody of Leo. Russell was allowed only supervised visitation, twice a month, at a neutral facility. The supervisor's report from their first visit said it all. Russell spent the hour trying to convince Leo that I was the bad guy, that I had broken up the family. Leo, my smart, perceptive boy, just looked at his father and said, "You're the one who played the secret game with Aunt Brenda. Mom didn't do anything wrong." After that, Russell's visits became shorter and less frequent. He couldn't face the truth in his own son's eyes. With the legal battles mostly settled, I knew Leo and I couldn't stay in that town. The house was no longer a home, it was a crime scene filled with the ghosts of a life that had been a lie. The courts had affirmed that the house was solely mine, part of my inheritance, and ordered Russell and Beverly to repay the fraudulent loan. I decided to sell it. I hired a realtor and held an estate sale. I sold the expensive furniture they had bought with my money. I sold the fancy china we never used. I watched as strangers walked through the rooms of my life, picking over the remnants. It was painful, but it was also liberating. I packed up only what truly mattered, boxes of photos, Leo's childhood drawings, my grandmother's cookbooks, and the few keepsakes that weren't tainted by their lies. The day the moving truck came, I took one last walk through the empty house. The rooms echoed with silence. I felt a pang of sadness for the woman who had been so happy here, so blissfully unaware. But I didn't regret leaving. I was closing a chapter. We moved 3 states away, to a small coastal town where nobody knew our names, where we could breathe again. We found a little 2-bedroom apartment with a big balcony that had a view of the ocean. It was smaller, less grand than our old house, but it was ours. It was honest. The first few months were hard. The quiet was the loudest thing. There were days I'd just sit on the floor of our new living room, surrounded by boxes, and feel a wave of grief so profound it took my breath away. I wasn't just grieving my marriage, I was grieving my sister, my mother, the entire family I thought I had. I had to learn how to be alone. I had to go to the grocery store and buy for 2 instead of 3. I had to learn how to fix a leaky faucet by watching online tutorials. I had to rebuild my life from the ground up, not just for me, but for Leo. We started small. We found a new school for him, and after a rocky start, he began to make friends. I got a part-time job at the town's quaint little bookshop, surrounded by the comforting smell of old paper and new stories. We took long walks on the beach after school, watching the waves crash against the shore, letting the salt air wash away the memories. We started new traditions. Friday night was pizza and a movie, cuddled on the couch under a warm blanket. Sunday morning was for making pancakes together, getting flour all over the kitchen. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to build a new life, a new definition of family, one based not on lies, but on the simple, unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. The final legal chapter closed about a year after we moved. The divorce was finalized. The court awarded me a significant settlement, recovering almost all the money they had stolen over the years from my inheritance and our joint savings. The criminal case also concluded. Facing overwhelming evidence, Beverly and Brenda took a plea bargain to avoid prison time. They received hefty fines, community service, and long-term probation. I heard through a distant cousin who called to check on me that my mother had to sell her big, beautiful house to pay the legal fees. Brenda was working as a cashier at a grocery store. Russell, unable to find work in his field, was living in a cheap apartment an hour away, drowning in debt. The universe has a funny way of balancing the books. One day, an unexpected letter arrived, forwarded from my old address. It was from Russell. It was long, 10 pages, handwritten, rambling, and stained with what looked like tears. It was full of self-pity. He said he was sorry, that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he missed me and Leo every day. He blamed Brenda for seducing him, he blamed my mother for encouraging him, he blamed his stressful job, he blamed everyone but himself. At the end, he asked if I could find it in my heart to forgive him, if maybe we could talk. I read the letter once, standing on my small balcony, the ocean breeze ruffling my hair. Then I walked back inside, found a pair of scissors, and methodically cut the letter into tiny little pieces. I walked back out to the balcony, opened my hand, and let the ocean breeze carry the confetti of his excuses away, scattering them over the waves until they were gone. Forgiveness? Maybe one day. But forgiveness is for my own peace, not for his absolution. He hadn't earned it. My life isn't perfect now. There are still scars. There are days when a sad song on the radio will make my chest ache, or when I see a happy family that looks like mine used to, and I feel a pang of loss for the lie I once believed in. But the scars are a part of my story, a reminder of the strength I never knew I had. Leo is thriving. He's a teenager now, tall and funny, with a good heart. He's on the soccer team. He has a crush on a girl in his science class. He is happy. He is safe. And me? I'm happy too. I've found a quiet, simple joy that I never knew when I was living in that big, beautiful house full of secrets. I have friends from the book club at the shop. I'm taking a pottery class. I'm learning how to be just Lorraine, not someone's wife or daughter, but my own person. Sometimes, when I'm at the bookshop, a customer will come in looking for a story with a happy ending. I always smile, because I finally have one of my own. It's not a fairy tale ending, not the one I would have written for myself all those years ago. But it's a real one. It's the story of a woman who was pushed to the edge and found out that she could fly. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here with me. If my story has touched you in any way, if it has made you feel less alone, or given you a bit of strength, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know whose life you might touch. Take care of yourselves, and never, ever let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are. You are stronger than you know.